this Wednesday night over Trump's tariff threat. When is it, March 4th or April 2nd?
It's not fair for us to be supporting Canada.
And what else Canada is expected to prove to the U.S. president? Doubts about what Ukraine and the U.S. have agreed to, what Trump is claiming, and what Zelensky says is a deal breaker. Mounting concerns about measles in Canada, the first death in a Texas outbreak, and the advice for people who got vaccinated years ago. And he's being hailed as a harvesting hero.
There's not a lot of black farmers in Canada. 0.2%.
The farmer on a mission to provide food security for black Canadians.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The U.S. president has created more confusion over his tariff threat. Donald Trump appears to be yanking Canada's chain again, saying he may delay the rollout of the 25% punitive tariffs on Canadian imports to the U.S.
I have to tell you that, on April 2nd, I was going to do it on April 1st, but I'm a little bit superstitious, so I made it April 2nd. The tariffs go on. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Is it an April Fool's joke? 2 days ago, Trump said the tariffs were going ahead on time and on schedule on March 4th. Mackenzie Gray begins our coverage on the contradictory messages emerging from the White House.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here.
At his first cabinet meeting since the presidential election, Donald Trump keeping up his attacks on Canada.
It's not fair. It's not fair that they're not paying their way. And if they had to pay their way, they couldn't exist.
And Trump wants Canada to pay an economic price, threatening multiple tariffs. The biggest, a 25% levy on Canadian goods, dropping to 10% for energy products, which has been paused until March 4th, a date that Trump might have just changed.
When does it go into effect?
April 2nd.
April 2nd for Canada, Mexico.
Correct. And for everything.
But the president seemed to mix up his dates. April 2nd is when reciprocal and sector-specific tariffs might come in. The March tariffs are tied to stopping the already minor amount of fentanyl that comes from Canada to the U.S., leading the Commerce Secretary to try and stop the confusion.
The fentanyl-related things, they're working hard on the border. At the end of that 30 days, they have to prove to the president that they've satisfied him to that regard. If they have, then he'll give them a pause, or he won't. But that's up to him to see.
Trump's quick dismissal of Howard Lutnick underscoring what Canadian government sources have told Global News. They view the Commerce Secretary, the person in charge of implementing any tariffs, as having limited influence over the president.
Prime Minister, what have you heard from Donald Trump about the tariffs?
At a Canadian cabinet meeting, the Prime Minister blowing by the cameras, leaving it to his ministers to make sense of the consistently moving goalposts on U.S. tariffs.
We act on the basis of signed documents by, the executive orders that would be issued.
Justin Trudeau also speaking with the premiers, a meeting BC's David Eby used to propose putting an export tax on thermal coal sold to the U.S.
If there are things that we can do to respond to the Americans, we should do it. If there are things we can do to strengthen our economy and diversify our markets, we're going to do it.
Trump's continued Canada bashing leading the NDP to say the president shouldn't be invited to the G7 scheduled for this June in Alberta.
As a host, we should work with other countries to develop a strategy on how we can resist the very dangerous ideas that Donald Trump's putting forward.
Trump has called for Russia to be invited back to the G7 11 years after it was kicked out of the group, Donna, by a unanimous vote. And a similar move would likely be needed for Trump to not be invited to Kananaskis.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. Trump's tariffs are a moving target. Provincial premiers are trying to prepare for what's coming and shift the focus from north-south trade to east-west trade. Nova Scotia is the first province to table legislation that will simplify interprovincial trade, but only with provinces and territories that agree to play by the same new rules. Heidi Petrachik explains what's planned and why some business owners are skeptical. This Ontario company specializes in manufacturing doors and windows, but when it comes to sales, the doors to other provinces are closed.
I think it's a shame that we are able to sell and service product in New York State, even in today's environment, more easily than we can in Hull, Quebec.
70% of Jack Schinder's business is south of the border. Removing interprovincial trade barriers, he says, would ease the potential pain of U.S. tariffs.
It would improve our local sales and service business dramatically.
The looming tariff threat has pushed premiers to break down entrenched internal trade barriers. Nova Scotia's PC government, the first to table legislation to allow goods and services to cross interprovincial lines without jumping through jurisdictional hoops. It would mean this Nova Scotia distillery could sell in other provinces without the costly red tape, and would remove the requirement for truckers to meet different regulations every time they cross a provincial borderline. But Tim Houston has said the road must go both ways, and business owners agree.
It's the classic, if one door is wide open and all the others are shut, that's not great for the wide open door province.
Ontario's Doug Ford supports the idea, but he's busy with the provincial election. While in BC, David Eby's government has said it would put forward legislation, but that hasn't happened yet.
British Columbia continues to push for a mutual recognition approach. This is where, if it's good enough for your province, it's good enough for our province.
And I don't think it should actually be reliant on tariffs or on the politics of the U.S. I think it's time for us to stand up for ourselves.
Back in Ottawa,
I won't believe it until it actually becomes real.
Jack Schinder is looking for new doors to open, even as another may close. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax. We have some breaking news from Manitoba tonight. The province says potential human remains have been discovered at a landfill north of Winnipeg. Search teams have been working to find the remains of two First Nations women, Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran. It's believed they may have ended up at the Prairie Green Landfill after being disposed of in May of 2022. The women, along with two others, were the victims of a serial killer convicted last year. The RCMP and the Chief Medical Examiner are now involved, and the province says the families of both women have been notified. The Liberal Party has begun voting to choose who will replace Justin Trudeau as leader. Registered party members have until March 9th to cast their ballots. As Taria Isri reports, one issue seems to be dominating: those threats from south of the border.
That's going to happen. We want to be the ones.
Who has what it takes to take on Donald Trump? It's the question dominating Canadian politics.
Canadians are a bit broken up on that right now.
Ipsos asked this in an exclusive poll for Global News. A tough negotiator. Who could get the best deal for Canada from President Trump? 28% answered Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, while 23% said Liberal leadership frontrunner Mark Carney. Our own little version of Trump here at home. The four candidates tried to tie Poilievre to the president Tuesday, President Trump, in a debate largely focused on Trump's tariff threats.
The Donald Trump of today is different.
He hits us, we'll hit him back. We have to talk to him.
This is a shakedown.
Carney's entrance has helped close the gap between Conservatives and Liberals.
They have wind in their sails, and we've seen a significant shift.
But the Conservatives are accusing Carney of misleading Canadians over his role in the investing firm Brookfield and its decision to move headquarters from Canada to the U.S.
The formal decision of the board happened after I ceased to be on the board.
That decision was announced in October. Carney resigned as chairman months later.
He's demonstrably lied to Canadians.
Carney's campaign calls the changes technical in nature and says Poilievre is scared of running against him. The Ipsos polling also found the top priority for Canadians is inflation, with healthcare second, while Canada's relationship with the U.S. jumped to third, surpassing the issue of housing and underscoring just how concerned Canadians are with Trump.